Welcome to Focus on Why, the podcast where reflection sparks action. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and together we'll explore compelling stories, profound insights, and transformative experiences from inspiring guests worldwide. Feeling lost or unfulfilled? Searching for clarity, purpose, or meaning in your work and life? This podcast invites you on a journey of self-discovery to align your work with your values, shape your future with intention, and create a purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we begin, have you read my new book yet? Focus on Why, Create a Purposeful Way of Life is co-authored with my late grandfather, George Fleming Kerr, and weaves in poignant journal entries detailing his experiences and insights of the 5 years he spent in captivity during World War II. Honest and heartfelt, this uplifting guide acts as your companion for life. Available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Check the show notes for links to get your copy today. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Louisa Hext. Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Amy?
I'm great, thank you. And we have the wonderful Madeline Black to say thank you for the introduction.
That is a helpful reminder. Madeline's
Yeah.
listening. Well, hello, Madeline. You're a good friend and I care about you.
Yeah, brilliant. It was a while ago that introduction was made, and such is the schedule that I have and lots of people booked in. Sometimes it takes a while before that first introduction and the pre-call I have with all of my guests to the actual recording date. So yes, that's where, and it's also useful for me to remind myself and thank people as to where I get these wonderful guests. So there we go. Thank you, Madeline. So tell me, Louisa, what is it you're focusing on right now?
I am focusing on relinquishing grievances. And the antithesis of that, I talk about things differently these days. If you'd asked me that question almost 6 months ago, I would say I'm focusing on forgiveness. And I've reframed that just a little bit. It's almost like reverse engineering, if you will. So a sense of betrayal, a sense of judgment. I think that all of us come from this place of looking into the universe to blame someone, something else for what happened. And we can't change the past. So if we want to move forward, we have to figure out, or I have to figure out how to move forward, which is apropos with what this is all about, Amy, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And this relinquishing of grievances, what I'm also hearing is personal responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, I think more, not necessarily actions that are defining a moment in time. The personal responsibility relates to how I'm going to live my best life with purpose. So, a little secret that's not going to be a secret anymore is I turned 60 in April. And that was probably the most challenging birthday I've ever had. And I usually love birthdays. I didn't want to hit 60. I don't know what that means. I don't feel like an old lady. I don't sound like an old lady. And I don't act like an old lady. And yet, it's probably, I've lived more years than I'm going to live, unless I'm Superwoman, maybe. I don't know. It's a tough birthday. And talking with others who come into my life, people who I know, people who I don't know, they've also shared the same.
And what I've also been witness to is that last year of a decade is quite a transitional one. So the 39 to 40, the 49 to 50. And what I'm hearing here is that 59 to 60 was a big
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Because I remember when I was 50 and I loved it. And I had all these things that I was relating it to. And, I saw a bear, like a real bear, on the way to a dinner party, and I had all this connection, and this was who I was. And, 60 was quiet, was really quiet. It wasn't a big celebration. It was a few little bits and bobs with dear people in my life. And now I'm on the other side. Kind of analogy, really, to my last decade, which has been an interesting one.
Yeah. Do you want to share a bit more about that?
Yeah. In terms of what frames our conversation, in gosh, March of 2012, I was accused of crimes that I knew I didn't commit. And they were in relationship to an elder who I adored, who I helped, just like anybody would help an elder. In this instance, this person wasn't a family member. He was my family, but he wasn't a family member. And he was in his early 90s, and I had known him a number of years. We were dear friends, and he became very unwell. And 4 months later passed away. And after he passed away, the judicial system in the community that I live felt that I had taken from him in a manner that I had not. And so that's the beginning, the bookend of those 10 years that led to January of this year, where the bookend closed. So the system and the resolution and my release, in terms of maybe the shackles that I had allowed to be placed, were technically released. However, I have spent 10 years living and breathing, taking steps forward, steps back, reframing that journey, coming up with all kinds of stories about why did it happen, and it shouldn't have happened, and that person's this and that and the other. And until, pretty early on, I realized that I, Louisa, had a choice. But I try not to use but, that's interesting. And even though I had a choice, it doesn't mean that I had the answers in terms of what direction to take. And so I think it's really important always on any journey to recognize that there are stops and starts and curves and kind of boomerang moments, when you get hit square in the head and you have to start all over again, those kinds of things. So that was the moment and the thing that happened. But it was really everything else about who I am as a person that is why, I'm literally here today, and why I have been invited to share some of my insight on my journey with you.
And when you say you're literally here today, what do you mean?
Well, I'm alive and well, and I have a small business, and I was just celebrating that I picked up a fun job, which, if I can talk about wine to people who love wine, is a fun job. So I have a little side job. My life is good. It's just not what I expected it to be, in terms of almost like being on this journey, inside of a journey. So there were times where I would think, what's the point? So for listeners, even though I have an English accent that's not as beautiful as Amy's, I was born and raised in London, England. However, I've lived a large part of my life in the United States, and that's where I live today. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and have lived in the Twin Cities since 2000, and previously in Columbus, Ohio, where I did my graduate work since 1986. So it's more years in the US than in the UK. And, when you ask the question literally, I mean, to be honest, I've never wanted to hurt myself. It was never, I'm literally here because I wanted to hurt myself. It's that I'm here, that, I went for a walk this morning with my little Asher, who is a 15-and-a-half-year-old uh, Yorkie Papillon, who's been with me that entire journey. And I've had other dogs. This is really interesting, actually, who have been in my life, but they were larger and they've passed on. And he's still here. And I've had him since he was 5 weeks old, like with me the entire time. So it's pretty cool. But I got to enjoy this beautiful day and to be here with you today.
Yeah, I hear you. And that journey that you mentioned and this expectation that you were not living the life that you expected it to be versus the reality, what had you expected to be doing?
Well, a more secure financial situation. I would say that I'm a go-getter, but I never expected that I would become a solo entrepreneur. And the reason that I became a solo entrepreneur was because the doors were closed for me to get a job that I typically had. Didn't really change what I was doing. I had to do it on my own. So right when all of this happened, I was considering becoming an independent consultant, but I hadn't quite jumped into that. And so I had been employed by others, which is a consistent income. Like you can expect a check, whether it's every week or every 2 weeks or however you get paid. There's usually retirement built in that you can build on. There's usually holidays. There's usually a structured schedule. And I didn't have or haven't had any of that for more since 2012. Now we're in 2025. It's more than a decade, isn't it?
13 years, yeah, for sure. So this journey that you're on and the journey that you've been through, having been accused of crimes that you knew that you didn't commit, and here you are now having gone through another journey of reframing forgiveness to now relinquishing grievances as you describe it. What's been the biggest learning for you?
Well, there's kind of this framework which interestingly aligns with my coaching practice, which I went through this practice without realizing it. So I thought I could share with you some of this framework, and then maybe you'll have questions surrounding it. The most important thing is to know myself. And usually people who've done a lot of work on themselves are able to move forward because we don't run away from pain and suffering. We feel into it. When you're feeling uncomfortable, you're probably doing the work. And through the lens of, so let me go back to this relinquishing of grievances and betrayal and such. For me, that means relinquishing, that means I've forgiven myself. It's almost like the antithesis. And the reason I'm talking about grievances and betrayal and judgment is what I learn is when I listen to people, when I listen to myself, when I am studying what people look for when they're seeking help, they don't necessarily say, I want to forgive myself. they say, I wish I wasn't so resentful and angry and bitter and blaming everyone else. And I actually had, just in this moment, kind of shivers, which is interesting. Like I felt it. So I've done a lot of work on myself, and 12 years is a long time. And I couldn't possibly have known everything 12 years ago. And also in the heat of the conflict, in the heat of the issue, and this is really important, I have to allow myself to feel that pain. I'm not saying that this is radical work, because it's not. So if there's anyone out there that is just in it right now, whatever it is, I'm not saying it's, buck up and stop being resentful and move on. There is a place to feel that disgust. How could this happen to me? Why did you do this? On and on and on. And if I came along and said to you, Amy, you shouldn't be where you are, but it just happened last week, that's kind of a kick in the teeth. So I'm not coming from that place. This is 12 years. So that the other side of it is to remind people that it's not immediate or radical, and it's not a step-by-step process, but knowing myself involves self-awareness and self-discovery. It also involves curiosity. The curiosity is the core ingredient for me. It has been. And it's asking the question, why, what, when. It's not the why. It could be a nasty why, I suppose. It's actually asking myself, why did this happen? How did it happen? Could it have happened differently? What are the pieces that led to this? I'm just giving that example, but the curiosity is the core ingredient to wonder why. And change can happen with curiosity, because it's, in my opinion, the first step to understanding, discovery. There's this process. I went through years of understanding and discovery, getting to the meat of it, or the core of it might be a better word. And from understanding comes what I found, empathy for myself and for others. And also for a long time, I had this notion, and we could go backwards and forwards on it, I suppose, that I could forgive someone else for an act that they had done, or even strangers, right? Learn about their story and have a sense of forgiveness for them. And I didn't need to forgive myself. And in reality, I think in this moment, in this time, I don't think that unless I can forgive myself, which again is to relinquish the sense of betrayal. Betrayal is a big word in my story. I felt very betrayed by a system consisting of people that had no idea who I was and had no interest in knowing who I was. They just wanted, really, to slam handcuffs on me and put me in prison.
And Louisa, I just want to ask
Yeah, I'm
you,
sorry.
before the moment goes, those shivers that
Mm-hmm.
you felt,
Mm-hmm.
what were they?
That I got it. That it's real, that it's true, I felt it in my body. And talking about somatics, I'm not a somatic experiencing coach. However, or self coach. However, I recognize the importance of, when we feel something in our body, we shouldn't ignore it. And the hardest part is actually naming the feeling and what emotions are attached to the feeling. And this is actually interesting. It's a really powerful question you asked me. It was so simple, but powerful. Is that those shivers were actually a reminder of the past. So, and we can be triggered, whether positively or negatively, and bring up something from the past, but we think it's in the present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the reason I asked you to just explain those shivers is when you get the goosebumps, I say tap into the tingle. And there's a reason to do this because I've noticed that discussing purpose, the why, which is the meaningful significance that we assign to our purpose, this often elicits a primal response of goosebumps. And it signals this personal and meaningful experience of whatever it is for the individual. It could be inspiration, connection, awe, joy, pride, nostalgia, excitement. It doesn't matter. But that's why I wanted you to tap into it. For you, it was real and truth. And that is indicating this authentic significance. So whenever it happens, it's just to take a moment to tap into the tingle and explore the source of those emotions further.
And even, this is really important, I resisted it.
Mm.
I almost didn't share that with you because I thought, oh, well, what does that have to do with that? And yet I put my hat on, my coaching hat on, and I wouldn't have ignored that if I were talking with somebody that shared their story. And a lot of people have a difficulty with using words to describe how they feel. And yet, as soon as I ask them, where do you feel this in your body? Where do you feel this in your body? Sit with it. Because, I have a person in my life who has a difficult time showing emotion facially. And so it's hard to communicate because you could be saying, I feel sad, and the person is deadpan. And yet, when you say, well, where do you feel it in your body? Then you really know.
Yeah. I use it a lot, and I often ask them to describe it as a color or a shape or as a sense, and because it's a lot easier to go through that. And it might be that it feels like a purple circle. And is it moving? Actually, it's more of a sphere and it's rising and it's in my stomach and it means this. And it's much easier to describe it that way than it is to, as you say, put a particular word to it. And so this, when we were talking at the time about the betrayal and the judgment, and that you wanted to forgive yourself, and that you were talking about moving through the different, why did it happen to me, the disgust, the blame, the bitterness and the resentment, and the in the heat of conflict, and then the shivers came. And that's where you then shared about getting them in terms of knowing yourself, the self-awareness, this curiosity.
Hmm. Yeah. And what it's done is it's allowed me to broaden my perspective, not be so black and white in my thinking. And I was raised by two parents, one who was extremely black and white, who was my primary caretaker because my parents went through a divorce. So my mom, who I adore and adored, who passed in the last 5 years, um, I struggled with black and white thinking. There was no gray. My dad, who, and I have to name it when they're no longer with us, because I'm visualizing them. he was so gray that it was impossible. You know, anything is possible. Like probably flying to the moon is possible. And I kind of come somewhere in the middle. And yet I have a tendency to have very black and white thinking in the heat of a conflict or a trigger. And I think that we do, as human beings, tend to go down the rabbit hole, the squirrely rabbit hole that is not really helpful for our well-being, and we get stuck. So the broadening of perspective allowed me uh, to let go, perhaps because I can't control, even today, what happened. And if I wanted to go back and control it, it's not a very nice place to be. It doesn't serve me. So and again, with relinquishing of grievances, and this is a daily practice. It's not even, let's make it more fun. All right, give you another example. I have one thing that drives me nuts, absolutely nuts, and it's people that cut me off on the highway or the motorway. And I notice, and I use this as an example all the time, that I go from 0 to 100 in a quarter of a second, which is actually what happens to our brains when we're triggered, in a lay perspective. There's yes and. So a quarter of a second, and it takes about 20 minutes for our brains to align after we are activated. So in this really easy example, where I want to literally do to that person what they did to me, that's not my nature, by the way. My real loving, happy-go-lucky nature. And yet it's part of my nature, I suppose, because I'm triggered and I want to go and do the same thing. I have learned to manage my response by taking a breath, by not allowing myself to actually do what the other person did. And it's taken me years and years. It doesn't mean that. Depends on how awful that person is when they cut me off. Like if they look at me or, the flip the finger thing, like, how dare you?
Just curious here. I have a theory about this, and I just want to ask you, what do you think triggers you about being cut up on the motorway?
Oh my God, that's a really good question. This could be a really deep conversation. I don't know if the theory is going to align. But I've always had this really big deal with what is respect and what is not respect, which I have no idea if it has anything to do with where you're going. Is it anywhere along
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So I've written down here that your boundary was crossed and your freedom was taken away from you because someone has come into your space, which triggers anger.
So it has, I suppose we could say it's about respect and not
Yeah.
respect. It's not really about, oh, who am I that you did this to me? I'm chuffing. If you could see me, my body is kind of puffy. It's more about, I like how you said that. And that actually feels scary when someone comes into my space uninvited
Yeah. And that's what they've done.
on multiple levels, right? So this cutting off experience could happen in a myriad of violating experiences. And I'll give you another very simple, fun example, and then we can move on. So I have this very dear friend in Warsaw, Poland. And most recently, in the last few days, her identity was hacked on social media. So this person in Kiev took her name and named it some ridiculous name, and then tried to get into her Meta account to access her credit card, right? And she can't change the name back for, I think it's a month or so. And then they did it with her Instagram. And it's this violation. Like she doesn't get to call herself herself.
Again, it's a violation of freedom.
So these little examples, and we can talk about, all the way, individuals whose bodies have been violated,
Yeah.
individuals whose lives have been taken away. I guess what happened to me was a violation.
Absolutely. And it was about identity. They, as you said, they had no interest in who you were.
No interest whatsoever. And the antithesis of it, or maybe not the antithesis, is had I, so for your audience, I chose not to go into a trial situation because there was a charge, and I took and this is less important to our conversation, but I took a plea bargain and it took me down a different path. One of the reasons that I chose not to go to a jury trial was because in that time, and I don't know if I would have done it differently now, I was so scared, literally, so, I think petrified is a better word, that the people that were selected, hand selected by attorneys to sit in a box and figure out if I was a truthful or honorable person, had no idea who I was. And my witness was deceased, who had already told everybody, "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous." So I had tons of friends and family, but this was about finances. And that's an entirely different story, you know, numbers and bank accounts. And so I was shit scared. So I said scared, shit scared, and petrified. And so I actually gave up a part. I did give up a part of myself to do what I was told to do because I was too scared to speak my truth in front of people who could point fingers at me and say, "We don't believe you." And that's a big deal for me because to this day, I am an extremely honest, ethical person. And I love people and I care about people. And that's what I was doing, was caring about someone I love dearly who was like my dad.
And it's interesting, isn't it, Louisa, that you said that you gave up a part of yourself to protect another part, essentially, right? And too scared to speak your truth, yes, but also too scared to be judged by people who didn't believe you. And yet their integrity was not being put on trial here. So, how is it that their truth is actually to be taken over yours?
But isn't it? That's how it is.
I know that's the system that we have to go with. And it is not a perfect system. We know that. I've had many guests on here, one in particular, Dr. Louise Hewitt, who spoke about the Innocence Project London that she works with. And the Innocence Project originated in America. And the criminal justice system, there is a very fine line that we tread. And there are many people, I don't know the numbers, but there are people who are innocent, who have been convicted. And it is very hard after then to be anything other than the guilty, because the system requires you to admit your guilt to then go through it and come out the other side,
Mhm.
even if you know that you're not.
And the plea bargain system is set up that way.
Yeah.
And also restorative practice, which I know is big in the UK and it's big in the US. You started our conversation talking about accountability. The irony of ironies in all of this is in order to participate in restorative practice, you have to admit to whatever it is, whether it's a crime or an action, because sometimes it might be, it's not considered a crime. The process is in place so that it doesn't become a crime, but you have to admit you did it. And if you don't admit you did it, then you don't get to participate, and you don't get to tell your story, and you don't get to be listened to, right? And stories are powerful. Uh, the most important thing, the piece that fits, this continuous circle, is making meaning in one's life, meaning making and purpose. And when we're hurt, it's easy to nurse and nurture our wounds. So something that I know happens, because I also work in family court, and I work in the whole array of alternative dispute resolution, is that people have a coping and pain management strategy to protect themselves. And it works for a period of time. It's necessary, like right at the beginning. And yet there's a time in our lives where it may no longer serve us. And so there came a point, and I don't know when exactly that point was for me, that continuing to tell the story that could be portrayed as a victim's story, I guess the words I was using were telling a story that was not about survival. It was about what people had done to me. I was able to transform my story and release the protection, like become more open-hearted and not really give two hoots about what anyone thought. So with that, if I really look deep, came resilience, that I loved myself, not loved, love, that I know my story, I know my truth, and I know my purpose. And yes, it's been an uphill struggle. I think I'm on a plateau, that the tipping point of incredible success, because I survived and continue to grow. And there's so many, like, if we take a step back and we think about all the powerful things that have happened, I much prefer to work for myself and help other people, but never
So
have done
now,
that. Sorry.
yes. No, I was just going to say, so now
Yeah.
you're talking from the scars, not the wounds. You were
Hmm.
talking earlier about, the nurturing the wounds and the coping and the pain management strategy of protecting yourself, and shifting that story that you're now sharing to understanding and bringing love, compassion, purpose, truth to the forefront. That's what you're honoring. And in the same respect, the respect, that you're honoring that. So when a moment as being cut up on the highway, the motorway, that respect has been again compromised, and because it is a value that you hold true to you.
I mean, I don't like the fact that I want to react to that. It's going to be, I think, for everyone, I'm not sure if I could be cut off and not be phased at all. It's just, so this is important, actually. It's how we respond. It's changing behavior. It's less about what happened, it's about doing something different. Could be exactly the same. So with people who I've worked with who have had family members murdered, can't change that that happened. Or tragic loss, a tragic accident. you can reframe in time what that means for your purpose now. You can look for the light, right? Rather than the darkness. We have both a dark and light side if we want to get into that. But
Yeah. And this is the what I call reflection with action, that you experience a moment in life and you instantly assign a meaning to that moment. And whether that's consciously or unconsciously, that's what happens based on your values, your beliefs, your perceptions, your interpretations, your experiences, and your emotions. But with reflection, you've got the option to choose a secondary subjective meaning, which is the why. This is the meaning that you assign to that moment. And that then creates the subsequent emotional or behavioral response. So yes, as you said right at the beginning, it's important to feel into the emotion, to feel into what happens, to know what that was like, to feel the instant experience. But then, as you also have said, you now have a choice and you get to exert that choice, which then affects the emotional and behavioral response, which then affects the subsequent action, which is the purpose in motion. And that's how life continues. And this is reflection with action, bringing purpose and why into every moment. And as you said, you're making meaning and purpose in one's life. And it's beautiful. So yeah, I hear you.
thank you. I mean, as you said that, I was sitting there empathizing because I'm a deep feeler and thinking, oh my gosh, someone's listening to that and wanting to take that path. I would be so overwhelmed if I was at the beginning of it, ready to take that path. And so I want people to know that, yeah, I did a lot of my own work. And yet there were many others on that path with me, whether they were friends, family, professionals that have helped to keep me on track or support me when I do fall to my knees because I can't manage anymore. And I'm not perfect by any means. You know, it's a lot easier to talk about it than do it. That's the other thing is we talk a lot about things and don't do things. Like we want to do things, and yet we need an impetus to do it. And my impetus was that I wanted my best life, was not going to throw my life away to this ridiculous circumstance. Emphasis on ridiculous.
Yeah, and you're walking the talk, and this is what's important, to walk the talk, to live your best life. Then yes, taking responsibility to release what is needed for you and to focus on, as you say, to love yourself, to know your truth, to know your purpose. And that's where you are right now. And I know that there was a lot more to your framework than we've got time for today, but I just want to say thank you for sharing what you have shared. And I'm sure someone would like to reach out to you. So what's the best way for them to do that? I know we're going to put it in the show notes, but just give them a direction now.
So I have a great website with resources, and it's embraceforgiveness.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say Facebook is the best place social media wise, although I fight with that a lot because it takes a lot to be posting. You'll see a lot of me with horses on Facebook. So my Facebook is open. It's Louisa Hext.
Perfect. Well, those links are in the show notes. So thank you. And thank you, Louisa, for sharing your journey. And I know we haven't probably even touched more than the surface level of what you've been through over this last decade and a bit longer. But what you have shared has been enough, as you say, for people to take away and go, okay, I'm not the only one here. This happens to others, and it's possible to come through. And it's possible to come through with grace and with compassion and love. So thank you for that journey that you've shared. Do you have some final words, please, for the listener?
Yeah, I have a couple things. I think it's important to, if you will, to look in the mirror and recognize your own imperfections like the rest of us. Because I think we expect to be perfect, and that's what really is challenging. Also, as you go through life, you will go through hurt, and you will hurt other people. So just be good to yourself. Give yourself some slack, because figuring out how to be a human being is difficult. It's a journey and not a destination to live with purpose.
This episode's over, but let's keep the conversation going. How has this episode impacted you? Share your insights, takeaways, and reflections with actions on social media, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback creates powerful ripple effects, helping others to discover its value. Want to dive deeper into purpose? Check the show notes for links on how to work with me, where to buy my new book, Focus on Why, Create a Purposeful Way of Life, available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and where to sign up for Friday Focus, my weekly newsletter. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.